The video today is about Ukraine and how George Soros has wrecked it. I started looking into this because, of course, there's the drama right now in the United States surrounding this whistleblower. This is all just a fake news bonanza at the moment. Each side is pointing fingers at the other. So what I want to do, that's why I started looking into this stuff, but I'm not trying to solve that mystery here. What I hope happens, though, in the end, is that people can see, just by looking at the history of the Ukraine and the players involved, I'm hoping you can maybe figure out who's telling the truth on this and what the real bottom line issue here is. So basically, my contention is that since World War II, Ukraine has endured 4 major revolutions. 3 of them, I believe, were engineered by George Soros, who was likely acting in concert with world bodies. I honestly think that the ousting of Poroshenko for Zelensky in the last election was not the result of organic processes, but also traces back to George Soros. We'll look at how George Soros has done this over the years, and it's been 25 or more years, and how the model of Ukraine is exported around the world. It's all done in the name of anti-corruption, and as with everything else, the globalists say it's a 180-degree inversion of the truth. They profit mightily from corruption. This is what's going to come up. George Soros and civil society organizations. The International Monetary Fund, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the World Bank are kind of going to come up. The European Union, fake news, and George Soros's puppetry of many, many, many people in Canada. And this ties to the CIA. The CIA, and just some incidental people, are Victor Pinchuk. I might briefly mention the Clintons and Joe Biden. I am not an expert at all. This is not a comprehensive look at this. And I might be missing giant things that other people know about. I might be. But this is a collection of information that I found and I want to present to you. Let's start here. There's an article in New York Magazine from 1995 by Connie Brook. It's called The World According to George Soros. Step 1. George Soros buys Bohdan Havrilician. It began back in the fall of 1991 when Ukraine declared its independence, and Soros had what he calls a seminal meeting with Dr. Bohdan Havrilician, an internationally known Ukrainian economist, blah, blah, blah. Bohdan Havrilician is not Ukrainian. He was a refugee from the war. Same pattern as always. And they moved all over the world and they landed in Canada. Now, here's an article from 1992 in the Edmonton Journal. Edmonton, Alberta, Canada is where a lot of Ukrainian immigrants settled. So in 1992, a whole bunch of people from that area were selected or elected themselves to go to Ukraine to enact the changes, wrenching changes in store, shifting to a free market economy, a precarious job. And this is a big article, and there are many such articles from Canada at that time. And it lists a bunch of people that we're going to go over there. One of them is Ole Havrilician, and his father is Bohdan Havrilician. This is who Connie Brook alleges George Soros bought. And indeed, in this article from 1992, it says that Bohdan Havrilician was the first displaced person of the post-war era in Canada to earn a university degree. In his case, it was in engineering. Then he went to work for Alcan, an aluminum company, before heading up the International Management Institute in Switzerland. How odd. It is in that position that the elder Havrilician established close ties with George Soros, a Hungarian who made his fortune in America. Now spends a significant portion of his wealth to facilitate a renaissance of democracy throughout Eastern Europe. It says President Leonid Kravchuk appointed a special international committee to advise him on a future course for action in Ukraine. Bohdan Havrilician is co-chairman of that committee, and Soros is seen as something of a patron saint. Although the younger Havrilician, that's Ole, Bohdan's son, did not discuss it. The opportunity to take on the job of Deputy Minister of Finance came by way of his father's ties to the Soros network. But Havrilian was also well suited for the job, it says. In addition to his position at Queen's University, that is, in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, he had worked for the World Bank, which has considerable interest in charting the future course in Ukraine. And there you see the ties. There you see Bohdan, Ole, the World Bank, and George Soros puppet mastering poor Ukraine. Ole Havrilian says his job is to deal with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and other organizations that have a stake in Ukraine's transition. Havrilian says the kind of backlash the world saw when Russian President Boris Yeltsin proclaimed he would not be dictated to by the IMF or World Bank has not been a problem in Ukraine. There is, he insists, no reluctance to move in this direction. That's because essentially what happened was George Soros saw fit to buy himself the leader of the Ukraine and then get the leader to replace all the bureaucracy, the important ones, with like a shadow cabinet. Havrilian, for example, and his son, not Ukrainian, came from Canada, and the World Bank got made the Minister of Finance for Ukraine. All right, so let's move on. By the way, here's Ole here. This is from September 3rd. From the IMF and digitization to agriculture and anti-corruption, Ole Havrilian take a look at what Zelensky needs to address to improve the economy and raise the standard of living for Ukrainians. 28 years later, he's still selling this same line. It has never worked. Soros bought those people. Okay. Another person that was involved at that early stage was someone called Helena Freeland. Helena Freeland practiced law in Canada for nearly 20 years and even made a run for parliament before coming to Ukraine in 1992 to work on a doctoral thesis in women's studies. After helping to organize some legal seminars, she was asked to put together her proposal for a legal reform in Ukraine. In working on that proposal, she met reformist deputy Serhiy Holovati. The two convinced billionaire philanthropist George Soros to fund their joint project, the Ukrainian Legal Foundation. So there's George Soros buying the law now. Here's a second article from Canada in 1992, all about the Canadian advisors helping Ukraine rebuild a nation. Build us a legal system, would you? It says. So from that article, we learned that Helena was meeting with the country's president, Leonid Kravchuk, and he was going to get her to set up a new legal system. She was given the mandate to overhaul the country's legal system. The presidential decree would ensure that individuals at every level of government would cooperate with her, a Canadian female professor in women's studies, who's funded by Soros. Further in that article, we read, the judges back home would have a heart attack if we were proposing something as radical as this. Helena Freeland is not the only Canadian involved in this reform and creation of a new legal system in the Ukraine, because it says already several top names in the field in Canada have agreed to participate. Somebody from the Supreme Court of Canada and somebody from the Ontario Court of Appeal. And another one is Bohdan Krochenko, the University of Alberta political scientist who now co-chairs the Ukrainian president's International Board of Advisors. And over here from that article about Soros buying people to own Ukraine, we see that he bought Bohdan Krochenko back in 1991. I just want to mention Helena Freeland's buddy, Serhiy Holovati. He went places. He's the director of the Rule of Law Center in the Ukrainian Legal Foundation. He's on the Council of Europe on the Venice Commission. And I'll tell you, he's also in the Supreme Court, I think, of Ukraine now. I think that comes up later. Bohdan Budzan, former top-ranking Canadian government bureaucrat, was one of the people that went over there, and he notes that several Canadians, including a number of Edmontonians, are helping his organization spearhead reform efforts and rebuild the civil service. Aha. So now we have Soros rebuilding the finance department, the legal system, and the civil service. George Soros' foundation at that point was called the Renaissance Foundation. It's a non-political organization, it says, backed by U.S. financier and public activist George Soros. This year alone, Soros has given the Kiev-based foundation more than 10 million US, a sum higher than many Ukrainian government departments operate on. This is all in the early 90s. In 1994, so this is 3 years after her reforms or into her reforms, it says that everything they built is, quote, under attack as the economy staggers and the country's rulers show signs of returning to their old repressive ways. Right? I'm not so sure that that was the problem, frankly. What was happening in Ukraine at that time, inflation was 9,000%. 85% of the population lived below the official poverty line. 1/3 of the country's large factories have been shut down. This journalist who went over there, he says, outside of Africa and maybe Haiti, Ukraine has to be the worst run country in the world. Fail, George Soros. You failed. You're a failure. You would think any self-respecting person, anyone who actually believes in human rights and the right to self-determination and autonomy and anti-corruption, you would think that he would back off. But he didn't. He's never left Ukraine. He just keeps meddling. Here's an article from 2004, which was the run-up to their next big revolution. 2 students expelled for mayonnaise throwing at George Soros. And in 2004, Soros engineered the Orange Revolution, a series of protests and political events that took place in Ukraine from late November 2004 to January 2005 in the immediate aftermath of the runoff vote in the 2004 Ukrainian presidential election, which was claimed to be marred by massive corruption, voter intimidation, and electoral fraud. And that's because the wrong guy won. The guy Soros wanted to win lost by a tiny percentage. What happened? The Supreme Court, bought and paid for, remember, by Soros's money, they overturned the results. They overturned the results of the election, causing another vote, and wouldn't you know it, their people won. Viktor Yushchenko and Julia Tymoshenko won. Viktor Yushchenko won the presidency. She ended up being prime minister. Yushchenko got poisoned. Tymoshenko ended up in prison. You know who put her in prison? He did. It's a complete mess. And by the way, all these people are oligarchs themselves. I don't know how George Soros can be so bad at ending corruption when he's in charge of the legal system, the civil service, the Supreme Court, the president, and has liaisons in the World Bank. How could he be so bad at it? Is he bad at it or does he like it? So here was the end of the glorious Orange Revolution where these two got installed into power. And here's what happened. Svetlana Osipchuk was there in the square in 2004. The unity of 2004 is broken now. The unity broke quickly. After taking office, Yushchenko made Tymoshenko prime minister, but the two soon became rivals. And today, many of their once ardent supporters say the economy is in bad shape, politics remains corrupt, and that revolutionary spirit is gone. They blame Yushchenko and Tymoshenko. Now, a lot of people can say that people are just dumb. They voted for the wrong candidates. But did they? The other guy won at first. Somebody made sure that that didn't happen. Who knows what it would have been like if he had won. In this article here from The Guardian, 2004, U.S. campaign behind the turmoil in Kiev. The Democratic Party's National Democratic Institute, the Republican Party's International Republican Institute, the U.S. State Department, and U.S. Aid are the main agencies involved in these grassroots, quote-unquote, campaigns, as well as the Freedom House NGO and billionaire George Soros' Open Society Institute. It says, if the events in Kiev vindicate the U.S. in its strategies for helping other people to win elections and take power from anti-democratic regimes, it is certain to try and repeat the exercise elsewhere in the post-Soviet world. And I think we see it happening. I think we see it happening right now in the United States. It was not orange, was it? It was pink. And then in 2013, 2014, we had Euromaidan happen. Another revolution in the Ukraine. Same exact formula. Look at what it was supposedly based on. Supposedly, just normal people and students got out there on the street in numbers because of a decision by the government not to sign the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement. That's why, supposedly, they had this bloody revolution where people died. People were burned alive in a building because their government decided not to sign on with the European Union, really? And they give us other factors. Their classic anti-communism and anti-corruption. No, I think it was all about the European Union. I don't think it was actually grassroots, though. I think we had the regime, the color revolution system in play, the civil society's call to action, the European Union using students, the excuse of anti-communism and anti-corruption, driven on by fake news, and that produces a color revolution. If you want to know much more about all of this, Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire is a good documentary, but watch out. Do you know what the fake news civil society organizations have done? There's another documentary, and I believe it's also called Ukraine on Fire. It's very similarly titled, and it takes the exact opposite opinion of this one. Of course it does. Of course it does. That's what they do. And also, Lee Stranahan. Love him or hate him. And I respect Lee. He has done excellent, thorough work on Ukraine, including all the stuff with the current attempt to bring down Trump. Alexandra Chalupa, the DNC, CrowdStrike, all of it. Lee's your guy. Go and learn from him. Because I'm telling you, I don't know a lot. I'm just bringing you information that I've found, as I've said already. All right, now we're going to get into the Liberal MP Chrystia Freeland on Ukraine. This is in 2014. This is before she was Minister of Foreign Affairs, okay? She has no qualifications to be a Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's being interviewed about the Ukraine. Freeland happens to own, with her sister, an apartment that overlooks the Kyiv Square. She had a front row seat to the Maidan revolution, the Euromaidan crisis. She speaks Ukrainian. She studied in Kiev during 2 stints back in the late 80s and early 90s. Oh, right when he took command of the Ukraine, and actually, right when her mother was reforming the legal system. So remember, her mother has a direct connection to George Soros because he funded the Ukrainian Legal Foundation, which she founded. Chrystia Freeland's granddad was indeed a Nazi collaborator, we learn. You can pause and read this if you like. There are lots of documents to prove it. Here's some pictures. This is him right here, her grandfather, Michael Chomiak. And this is Emil Gassner, the Nazi administrator in charge of the press, was a quote-unquote journalist. He was one of these people that slipped out The Polish intelligence services were hunting for Chomiak until the 1980s without knowing that he had fled for refuge to an Alberta farm in Canada that continues to be one of Freeland's real estate assets today. And she's really good buddies, by the way, with George Soros. Chrystia Freeland was going to be George Soros's authorized biographer. Freeland's parliamentary website ran this picture of Soros, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Freeland at a World Economic Forum meeting she arranged in Davos in 2016. That picture is gone. At least I can't find it at the link provided. And here's Chrystia interviewing Soros in 2015. She's interviewed him many, many times. Interestingly, you used to be able to easily call these up on YouTube. It's not so easy anymore. I couldn't find any more. I wanted to get screen grabs from all of them for you, but I didn't feel like hunting all day for them. But they're out there. When Chrystia Freeland was a reporter, it says the Financial Times management in London proved to be more inquisitive of Freeland's closeness to the subjects of her reporting, namely Soros. According to the Globe and Mail, she clashed with editor-in-chief Lionel Barber and was ousted from her post in Europe. In 2015, George Soros allegedly wrote this paper called A Short and Medium-Term Comprehensive Strategy for the New Ukraine. The new Ukraine, yet again. Yet again. This is his third go. His third kick at the can. Now, I don't know where John Solomon got this paper, but that's who uploaded it. Leaked 2015 George Soros strategy memo on Ukraine. So take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. I'm not 100% that this was written by George Soros. But basically what it says is that after nearly a year of preparations, all the ingredients of a radical reform program are available. They just need to be put together. The National Reform Council brings together the presidential administration, the cabinet ministers, the Rada, it's like a parliament, and its committees, and civil society. Remember, civil society is him. That's his Renaissance Foundation, and all the foundations that he funds through that foundation, which are hundreds and hundreds of them, a lot of journalists, anything he needs to keep chaos going. On the second page of his paper, he says the National Reform Council is up and running. The International Renaissance Foundation, his foundation, was the sole financial supporter of the NRC until now, and it will be one of the main supporters of the PMO, the Project Management Office, which is in charge of financing the NRC and implementing various reform projects. Do you see how he builds these spider webs of control? And he funds it all, but it doesn't look like he's funding it. From the outside, you can't tell. The centerpiece of economic reforms will be the reorganization of Naftogaz. Interesting, because isn't that what this is all about again? The gas companies? The thing with Trump and Hunter Biden and all of these? They all own stakes in one another. First, set up the anti-corruption agencies, such as the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the National Agency for the Prevention of Corruption. You see, he has no interest in ending corruption. Why set up two bureaus? So that they can fight with one another? So that they can contradict each other? You know what it is? It's narcissism. Narcissist needs two different people to play off of one another. They need to triangulate a situation. That's how they maintain control. And then next, he wants to implement the first stage of the judiciary reform, including setting up a new High Council of Justice and launching reappointment procedures for judges. Third, launch the constitutional reform program with decentralization as the first goal. Oh my gosh, so he's doing the entire thing all over again. Later in the paper, he says, a $1 billion annual allocation to Ukraine with only 9% charged to the budget would make $11 billion available annually. And they talk about this being covered by comprehensive political risk insurance, which is available in addition to providing budgetary and other support to Ukraine. The insurance would be sold through the established national and international institutions like Ole Hermes in Germany, OPIC in the US, and MIGA at the World Bank. These institutions would be reimbursed by the EU through the MFA to make the insurance commercially attractive. But the European Union cannot be expected to take on the additional risk unless Ukraine demonstrates its determination and ability to fulfill all the requirements listed above. All these requirements plus more. Remember all these new agencies he wants to set up. All so that Ukraine can get massive, massive debt from the World Bank and the IMF, plus be allowed to buy insurance from 4 other agencies who will then have all of that underwritten by the European Union. The European Union won't underwrite any of that unless Ukraine does exactly what George Soros says in his paper. And when you know it, May 5th, 2016, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has said that they will support Ukraine's National Reform Council. As part of the new reform support architecture for Ukraine, the European Bank goes on to add more layers of bureaucracy to this. They say that the NRC needs to support newly formed reform support teams and extend support for the activities and outputs of SAGSUR. SAGSUR is a group that is being formed comprising primarily international advisors to the Prime Minister and President, whose role is to advise on how to carry out reforms and stay in line with the expected results of international creditors such as the IMF and the European Commission. Oh my God. Okay, I hope you have a flavor for how he does this. It's suffocating bureaucracy. It's indebtedness. And is ginning up mobs to make them think they're demanding this. The mob thinks they're demanding all of this bureaucracy. Well, what it does, it probably doesn't know it's demanding all of this bureaucracy, but what it does is it provides cover for these civil society organizations to say that they are acting on behalf of the wishes of the people. The people wanted this choking red tape. And it's all in the name of anti-corruption. So to top it off, here's George Soros ending his report. Once the insurance is available, I am prepared to invest up to $1 billion in Ukrainian businesses. This is likely to attract the interest of the investment community. As stated above, Ukraine must become an attractive investment destination. The investments will be for profit, but I will pledge to contribute the profits to my foundations. This should allay any suspicions that I am advocating policies in search of personal gain. It doesn't. It doesn't. Because as you see, he takes that money and he puts it into his foundations, which he then gives to other foundations that he controls, and the whole process starts again. He's already a mega billionaire. And by making situations through his billions that change a country, he can do other investments elsewhere, outside of the country, which profit from the situation in Ukraine. So what's happening now? Let's bring this around to modern day. Zelensky, he got voted in April this year. And his first trip to North America was to Canada for a 3-day event hosted by Chrystia Freeland, our Minister of Foreign Affairs. And going back years, Freeland has been involved with Viktor Pinchuk's Yes Foundation, yet another foundation by another oligarch. He's an oligarch. Here they are together here. It's from 2012. This one's from 2012, 2013, 2018, she's with the Viktor Pinchuk Foundation in Davos. 2018, also, Chrystia Freeland was one of the panelists and an American conference called Taking on the Tyrant, all about bashing Donald Trump. And it all traces back to this, to the coaching from Canada, where Soros pilfered a lot of Canadian academics to remake the Ukraine in his image. So you know what's really, really fascinating is when you find something like this from April 1958, a declassified CIA document that talks about an asset they had called eCassowary 2. And it says, eCassowary 2 recently completed a trip to Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, and Edmonton, Alberta to discuss possibilities of operational support among his contacts and friends there. At the same time, he spoke on several occasions to gatherings of Ukrainians in those cities. He stated that the Ukrainian emigration in Canada is the fourth largest minority group, but because it has not been assimilated and has maintained strong Ukrainian organizations, it is now a political force of considerable power. And down here it says potential Redskin recruit. eCassowary 2 provided the undersigned with information about a distant cousin of subject's wife, M.O. Halavati. Do you remember that name from before? I looked up M.O. Halavati. He was born in West Ukraine in 1922. In 1940, he entered the University of Breslau, graduated in 1943. 3 weeks after his final exam, Breslau became the scene of military action, and Dr. Halavati escaped just ahead of the oncoming Reds. He then settled in Heidelberg, where he was appointed science associate in the Chemical Physiological Institute of the University of Heidelberg, remaining there until 1948. Simultaneously, he served as liaison officer at the U.S. military government headquarters in the same city. And then he moved to Michigan. You remember the name Halavati? Sergei Halavati? Deputy Chairman of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. That's who he is now. And he was partners, if you recall, with Chrystia Freeland's mom, Helena Freeland. Sergei Halavati. The two convinced billionaire philanthropist George Soros to fund their joint project. And now he's deputy chairman of the Constitutional Court. And he might be related to this guy, which is extremely interesting in light of this document, another CIA declassified document from the end of World War II, which talks about Project Rusty and lays out the future for Europe and the world in 1945. I'm just going to read it. In the future, world politics will be determined exclusively by the U.S. and the USSR. The U.S. will represent the democratic system based on the individual rights of man and will have the responsibility of protecting the Western nations. The USSR will represent the principles of dictatorship, collectivism against individualism, atheism against religion, state economy against private enterprise. In addition to that, the historical period of national states seems to be over in Europe, and it is to be replaced by a union of European nations. A union of European nations. That was written in 1945. And remember earlier I said, why would George Soros appoint 2 anti-corruption organizations? Why would they want to form simultaneously 2 anti-corruption organizations in the Ukraine? I said it was to triangulate them because then it's easy to play one side off against the other. Well, what if the Germans here, who were the fascists, if you recall, look what they've done. They've said, oh, the fascists are finished. It's going to be a battle now between free enterprise and capitalism and communism. What position does that put the fascists in then? Puts them in the middle. They've gone underground They call themselves every name but fascist. They even call themselves anti-fascist sometimes. In this part of another 1958 declassified CIA document talking about their same agent, a cassowary, at the Brussels Fair, they point out that they've met a person called Dr. Oleska Horbach, who has personally met many of the Ukrainians in Poland, and who would not draw suspicion to himself, since his reputation as a Slavic scholar would give him adequate reason to be interested in meeting with his counterparts from Poland. So see, they're seeing if this guy could be a potential agent or informant, and whether or not he would arouse suspicion if he was working for the CIA. Nobody would be asking, why is this guy meeting with all these Polish intellectuals? Because he's a Slavic scholar, and it makes perfect sense that he would be over there, right? Well, let's have another look at Chrystia Freeland. Chrystia Freeland values her Ukrainian heritage. Her mother was born in a refugee camp. She was awarded a scholarship to attend United World College of the Adriatic in Italy from 84 to 86. She studied Russian history and literature at Harvard University, which included an exchange in Kiev just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. In 1993, she was a Rhodes Scholar, and she had obtained a Master of Studies degree in Slavonic Studies at Oxford. What did this say again? She's shaping up to be a pretty good potential CIA asset, isn't she? And if you consider whatever happened at the end of this, when they captured the German spies in Project Rusty, they eventually turned that unit into the CIA and also the BND in Germany, and also potentially MI6, Austria, and other countries. So really, it looks like they set up a worldwide underground intelligence service that got broken up and placed in different countries, and all these countries all the while believed that they had an independent intelligence service for their own country. But they were all linked through this Project Rusty thing back in 1945. Okay, and then they say that in order to do what they want in the Slavic states, they're going to look for Slavic scholars as assets. And by the way, the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, which is Slavic Studies, was set up by a Harvard graduate. He was a driving force for the creation of an Institute of Ukrainian Studies and a major spokesman for multiculturalism. The goals of the Canadian Institute for Ukrainian Studies, well, they're listed here, and they're very much about interrelationships. And look what it says. Teaching was not a part of the Institute's mandate. How's that? And who was one of the first people to work there? Bohdan Krochenko. What did it say in The World According to George Soros? It said, Bohdan Krochenko, a Ukrainian-Canadian historian, was recruited by Havrilishin and Soros to work for the foundation. Contrasting the Soros Foundation in Ukraine with its counterparts in other countries, Krochenko told me, there is no other place where the Soros Foundation is so plugged in at the top. Poor Ukraine. And all of this is extremely relevant now. Because bringing us up to date, here's Lee Stranahan. Viktor Pinchuk, that's who Freeland always hangs around with there, the Yalta Yes Conference. Viktor Pinchuk isn't merely a close friend and big funder of the Clintons and Chrystia Freeland. He's important at NATO's Atlantic Council, which connects him to CrowdStrike, Irina Shalupa, Khodorkovsky, Browder, Michael Weiss, and the entire U.S. military-industrial complex. Foundation ties bedevil Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. This is from the New York Times when it still did some news in 2016. Viktor Pinchuk, a steel magnate whose father-in-law, Leonid Kuchma, has directed between $10 million and $25 million to the Clinton Foundation. What was this? His father-in-law is Leonid Kuchma? George Soros buys Leonid Kuchma. That's from this article again. Leonid Kuchma was very integral in Soros's first restructuring of Ukraine. Here he is here. Here's his daughter married to Viktor Pinchuk. And here's the whole gang with Bill Clinton. This is from a blog, and they were going over Connie Brooks' article. And they say, curious that George Mother Teresa Soros is unable to prevail upon his protege, Leonid Kuchma, to allow a free press. One might have imagined that in his selfless efforts to modernize Ukraine, a free press would have been among Soros's most urgent goals. But instead, despite all of George Soros's efforts, somehow, Ukraine has ended up with the press of a police state in which journalists are sued, harassed, beaten, and assassinated. Despite such daunting obstacles to arriving at a clear view of what's happening, suggestive clues that George Soros works to injure Ukraine do emerge. The press situation has changed in Ukraine. Let me show you how. This is from 2014. Information war looks different in its east and west. In Kiev, private sector business people have organized a reporter-friendly, highly professional crisis media center on the third floor of the centrally located Hotel Ukraina. Foreign and Ukrainian journalists are invited to nearly daily briefings by government officials, think tanks, and visiting statesmen. The sessions are translated simultaneously, and there's robust give and take. Not every statement is a fact, and everything is subject to checking. We set it up in 48 hours, said Vasyl Miroshnishenko, a partner in CFC Consulting, a strategic communications firm. The money for this has been donated by Ukrainians living outside of the country. International financier and philanthropist George Soros's International Renaissance Foundation, and the employers of some of the staffers whose salaries have been kept going while they work at the center. The goal of the public relations and strategic communications executives who set up the center was objective information about Ukraine targeted to the international media. Yeah, sure. The executives get together daily to decide whom to invite the next day and what message they want to put out. So there you go. That's the idea of a free press, is a press that's funded by international people and George Soros. That's how they fixed the problem. There was a hopeful development that happened in the Ukraine in their fight against corruption, probably the best thing they could do. In 2017, a new bill by Poroshenko forces graft watchdogs to file declarations of assets. So you see, the civil society organizations were going to have to file the same transparency forms every year as they wanted other people to file. And Soros cried. Of course he did. He didn't like it at all. Members of Ukraine's civil society called the new measure discriminatory and said it will also affect journalists who uncover corruption because many work for nonprofit groups. This is in 2017. This reform came, and there was much pressure, apparently, on the Ukrainian government to take it out. Get rid of it, they said to Poroshenko, who was the leader at the time. Don't do it. And he refused to take it out. So did the Rava or Raga or Vega or whatever their parliament is called. They were going to leave it in. I have here too, look, side note, for all of these efforts, for all of the civil society work that was being done that was so important, the average monthly salary in Ukraine hovers at $200. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That's what Soros has wrought. So they said to themselves, we've been hunting high and low for corruption in Ukraine. We've done work for 27 years. We've put in all kinds of new watchdog groups. We've let you have free rein, George Soros. We've let you try all these experiments, and yet we are still corrupt, and our people's average salary is only $200 a month. Maybe the corruption is in the anti-corruption organizations. Maybe it's in the civil society organizations. And like I said, Soros and all his people mobilized. No, don't do it, Poroshenko. Back off. This is a horrible idea, said all the fake news and other civil society organizations and international bodies, they all spoke with one voice. But it was still going to go through until April 22nd, 2019. Ukraine election, comedian Zelensky wins presidency by a landslide. Mr. Poroshenko admitted defeat. Mr. Zelensky is a political novice and he's best known for starring in a satirical television series. Yeah, you heard that right. They replaced a politician with a comedian. Why would they do that, I wonder? Well, look what happened a month after the election. G7 ambassadors welcome decision on unconstitutionality of e-declaration for anti-corruption activists. That's right. They overturned the amendment which would have forced anti-corruption NGOs, experts, and other persons who directly or indirectly receive funding to declare their assets, expenditures, and property. They overturned it, and the decision was published June 7th, 2019. Who do you think benefits from that? Not the Ukrainian people. All these guys. All these guys benefit from that. It is a complete joke to think that these NGOs or these international bodies or the fake news is reporting the reality when you look at this. That the average monthly salary in Ukraine hovers at $200. All of this stuff is probably news to most people. Maybe not my audience, maybe not you guys. But most people would have no idea of how this is structured. They would have no idea that the CIA went in and specifically found Ukrainian emigres to bring into the fold. They would have no idea that anti-fascist actually means fascist, or that anti-corruption actually means corruption, or that civil society is what creates revolutions and Maidan and the Orange Uprising and all these color revolutions all across the world. The average person doesn't know that. The average person probably doesn't know that the salary in Ukraine is $200 a month. The average person doesn't know that Soros and his buddies pretty much own the media. The average person doesn't realize that the European Bank for Reconstruction and the IMF and the World Bank and the EU and the UN and 100 other supranational organizations. That kind of thing is how they make their money. And all the while they go around pretending they're doing the exact opposite. They get away with it. They get away with it because it is a very tight, well-oiled machine. I'm going to stop talking now. I thank you very much for listening. This one, as I said, it's all over the place. Because when you start looking at globalism, there's no easy way to boil it down. There's also no way to bring you all of the information. So what I've hoped I've done today is show you some strands of this web, the globalist web, and how it affects all our lives, and how they have made this a formula. They go into country after country and they enact this same program. People really need to wake up to the fact that the press is owned by the oligarchs, by the globalists. And the only truth they ever tell you is truth they've made up that benefits them. All right, everybody. I'm going to leave links to the references in the description box, along with to my paypal.me if you'd like to contribute to my work and help me keep doing this, which I love to do and love to bring to you. Thank you to everyone who's contributed so far. Thank you to everyone who's sent things to my P.O. box. If you would like to send me something, the address is on my webpage, amazingpolly.net, on the contact page. You can find it there. I'll leave links to my BitChute and my Twitter in the description. Also, make sure you go check out Lee Stranahan. Make sure you go check out the Oliver Stone documentary on the Maidan uprising, Ukraine on Fire. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll be able to get in touch with other like-minded people with whom you can share the truth and learn from. Okay, that's really it. Until next time, peace out.